On a quiet autumn morning in Plains, Georgia, President Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, made an unplanned stop that would change a life forever. A worn American flag, clutched in trembling hands, caught his attention, a symbol of pride held by a homeless black veteran standing on the edge of hope. What happened next left everyone speechless, as Carter once again proved why compassion and leadership go hand in hand. The sun cast a warm golden glow over Plains, Georgia, as the small town came alive with its usual rhythm. On this crisp autumn morning, the streets were dotted with familiar faces heading to church, children laughing as they raced their bicycles, and shopkeepers unlocking their doors to start the day. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of baked goods from the local cafe. Among the crowd, a figure moved with quiet purpose. Jimmy Carter, the town's beloved son and former President of the United States. Though retired, he remained deeply connected to his community. Wearing a simple sweater and slacks, his demeanor was as approachable as ever, reflecting a life dedicated to service and humility. After attending a morning church service, Jimmy decided to take his usual stroll through the square, greeting townsfolk with a smile and a wave. Near the corner of the grocery store parking lot, a man stood out, though not in a way most would notice. Marcus Taylor, a black veteran in his late 40s, clutched a worn American flag in one hand and a cardboard sign in the other. The words, neatly written but slightly smudged, read, "Veteran in need of help. God bless his clothes were frayed, his boots scuffed and cracked from years of wear." Despite his weathered appearance, there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, his back straight, his grip on the flag firm. Passers-by glanced at Marcus but quickly looked away, uncomfortable with the stark reminder of hardships too easily ignored. Children tugged their parents' hands and shoppers avoided his gaze as they hurried into the store. Marcus didn't call out or plead. He simply stood there, the flag in his hands a silent testimony to a life of service and sacrifice. Jimmy Carter's gaze lingered on Marcus as he approached the square. At first, it was the flag that caught his attention, its edges frayed but its colors still vibrant. Then it was Marcus himself, the stoic expression, the weary yet proud stance. Jimmy paused mid-stride, the hum of the town fading into the background. He turned to the two members of his security detail trailing behind him. "Stay back," he said softly, gesturing for them to keep their distance. This was a moment he wanted to handle alone, without fanfare or interruption. As he walked toward Marcus, Jimmy's heart ached at the sight before him. He knew all too well the stories behind men like Marcus, veterans who had given everything for their country, only to face unimaginable struggles when they returned home. Yet there was something about Marcus, holding that flag, that stirred something deeper in him. Jimmy's footsteps crunched softly on the gravel as he neared the veteran. Marcus noticed him and straightened slightly, his grip on the flag tightening. His eyes briefly darted to the two men in suits lingering in the distance, then back to Jimmy. There was a flicker of recognition, but it was quickly replaced by cautious uncertainty. "Good morning," Jimmy said, his voice warm and steady. Marcus hesitated. "Morning," he replied, his tone respectful but wary. Jimmy extended a hand. "I'm Jimmy," he said simply, not assuming the weight of his name would matter in this moment. Marcus nodded slowly, his hand rough and calloused as he shook Jimmy's. "Marcus," he offered. Jimmy's eyes shifted to the flag Marcus held. "That's a beautiful flag you've got there," he said, his voice tinged with reverence. Marcus glanced at it, a faint, bittersweet smile touching his lips. "It's been with me through a lot," he said quietly, "just like the country it represents." Jimmy studied Marcus for a moment, taking in the layers of pride and pain etched into his face. "Mind if I sit for a bit?" he asked, gesturing to the curb nearby. Marcus blinked, surprised by the question, but nodded. "Sure." As the two men sat side by side, The buzz of the town continued around them, but for Jimmy and Marcus, time seemed to slow. For a man who had once walked the halls of power, sitting on a curb with a veteran holding a flag felt as significant as any summit or meeting he had ever attended. Jimmy Carter had always believed that true leadership was rooted in compassion, and here, compassion had found its purpose. The morning sun cast a soft golden light over Plains, Georgia, as Jimmy Carter strolled through the town square. The faint hum of activity filled the air, from the gentle chatter of neighbors to the clang of a bell from a distant church. The former president, now in his 90s, moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to greet familiar faces with a warm smile. On this crisp autumn morning, something unexpected caught his eye. Across the street near the corner of a small grocery store, a man stood clutching a worn American flag. The man's posture was proud, but his clothes were frayed, his expression shadowed by years of hardship. Jimmy slowed his pace, his gaze fixed on the man's weathered face. The flag, though tattered, fluttered lightly in the breeze, an enduring symbol amidst visible struggle. With quiet determination, Jimmy crossed the street, leaving his security detail a few steps behind. As he approached, the man's eyes flickered with a mix of caution and curiosity. Jimmy extended a hand, his voice steady and kind. "Good morning," he said. "Mind if I sit with you for a moment?" The man hesitated before nodding. "Name's Marcus," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Marcus Taylor." Jimmy settled onto the curb beside him, unbothered by the stares of passers-by. "I couldn't help but notice your flag," he began. "There's a story there, isn't there?" Marcus's fingers tightened around the flagpole. For a moment, he seemed unsure, his gaze flicking between Jimmy and the flag. "Yeah," he said finally. "There's a story." He glanced at the older man, recognition dawning faintly in his eyes. "Wait, you're—" "Just Jimmy," Carter interrupted gently, waving off the formalities. "Tell me about your flag, Marcus." The man's shoulders relaxed slightly, his defenses softening under Jimmy's unassuming presence. "This flag's been with me through a lot," he said, his voice quieter now. "Carried it through Afghanistan and Iraq. It's seen some battles." Jimmy nodded, his expression earnest. "And now?" Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. "Now I carry it here," he said, gesturing to the street corner. "Reminds me of what I fought for. Helps me remember that I mattered, at least for a while." There was a raw honesty in his words that struck Jimmy deeply. "You matter now, Marcus," he said firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus let out a faint chuckle, shaking his head. "Doesn't always feel that way," he admitted. 12 years in the Army. Then I come back, and it's like the world moved on without me." He paused, his voice growing heavier. "PTSD kicked in hard. I couldn't hold a job. Bills piled up, rent fell behind, and here I am." Jimmy's gaze didn't waver. "That's a lot to carry," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "But what choice do you have? You keep going, even when it feels like no one sees you." Jimmy's heart ached at the weight of Marcus's words. "Have you reached out to any veteran programs?" he asked gently. "There's support out there?" Marcus sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Tried," he said. "Called hotlines, went to shelters, got stuck in endless waiting lists and paperwork. You start to feel like a number, like you're just another name in a system that doesn't care." Jimmy leaned forward, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "That's not right," he said. "After everything you've given, you shouldn't have to fight this hard to be seen." Marcus glanced at him, a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, passing through his eyes. "You're the first person in a long time who's stopped to listen," he said. "Most people just walk on by." Jimmy offered a small, understanding smile. "Well," he said simply, "I'm not most people." They sat together for a moment in silence, the world bustling around them. Jimmy's presence was steady, unshaken by the enormity of Marcus's struggles. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt truly seen. Jimmy didn't waste a second. His gaze locked on Marcus, his voice steady yet firm. "We're going to get you some help today," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. Marcus looked up, startled. "You don't have to do all this," he began, but Jimmy held up a hand. "No arguments," he said, dialing a number. The voice on the other end answered quickly, and Jimmy spoke with quiet authority. "Pastor Reynolds, it's Jimmy. I need your help. There's a veteran here who needs temporary shelter, just a safe place to stay while we figure things out." He paused, listening to the response. "Thank you. I'll bring him by later this afternoon." Jimmy ended the call and turned to Marcus. "First things first," he said, smiling. "Let's get you something warm to eat." He gestured to the diner across the street, its windows glowing invitingly against the crisp autumn air. Marcus hesitated, then nodded, allowing Jimmy to guide him. As they crossed the square, a few people paused mid-stride, their eyes widening. It wasn't every day you saw Jimmy Carter walking arm in arm with a homeless man. Inside the diner, the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. Jimmy chose a corner booth, insisting Marcus take the more comfortable seat. "Order anything you like," Jimmy said, sliding a menu across the table. Marcus scanned the options, logically his fingers trembling slightly. When the food arrived, hot soup, a hearty sandwich, and a slice of apple pie, Marcus stared at the meal for a long moment before murmuring, "Thank you, Mr. Carter." Jimmy shook his head. "Call me Jimmy," he said, "and don't thank me yet. We've got work to do." As Marcus ate, Jimmy leaned forward, asking more questions about his life, his service, and his dreams for the future. Marcus's voice grew steadier as he spoke, though his words carried the weight of years of hardship. Meanwhile, the diner began to stir. Customers whispered among themselves, sneaking glances at the unexpected scene. Someone snapped a photo, and within minutes, the news was spreading through the town. "Jimmy Carter's at the diner," one man murmured into his phone. "He's sitting with a homeless vet. Can you believe it?" Outside, a small crowd began to gather. Some peered through the windows, others lingered by the door, curiosity drawing them closer. Jimmy noticed the attention but didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed it. Turning to face the growing group, he stood and addressed them directly. "This is Marcus," he said, his voice carrying easily over the low hum of conversation. "He served this country with honor, and now he needs our help." The onlookers shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of shame and intrigue. "Too often," Jimmy continued, "we walk past people like Marcus without a second thought. But every one of them has a story, a name, a life worth saving." Marcus lowered his gaze, clearly moved but unused to such public attention. Jimmy rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We can't fix everything today," he said, "but we can take the first step." With that, Jimmy pulled out his phone again, this time dialing the local branch of a veteran-focused nonprofit. He explained Marcus's situation, his words calm but insistent. "He needs counseling, job training, and a fresh start," Jimmy said. "Can you help?" The voice on the other end confirmed they could, and Jimmy smiled. "Good. Let's make it happen." When the call ended, Jimmy turned to Marcus. "They'll be reaching out to you soon," he said. "In the meantime, I'll make sure you've got what you need." Marcus's eyes brimmed with emotion, but he didn't let the tears fall. "Why are you doing all this?" he asked quietly. "You don't even know me." Jimmy met his gaze, his voice unwavering. "Because I believe in what you've given to this country," he said, "and because I can." The crowd outside began to applaud, the sound building in waves until the diner itself seemed to hum with collective energy. Marcus glanced around, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. Jimmy sat back down, his tone softening. "This isn't just about you, Marcus," he said. "It's about showing people what's possible when we care for each other. Your story has power. Don't forget that." As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, Jimmy made one final promise. "I'm not leaving this to chance," he said firmly. "I'll stay involved until you're back on your feet. You're not alone in this." For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to believe it. Jimmy Carter was always a man of his word. A week after their first encounter, he made his way to the small, temporary shelter where Marcus had been staying. The shelter was modest, its exterior showing signs of wear, but it provided warmth and a roof. Two things Marcus hadn't had in months. Marcus was sitting in the common area, flipping through a worn magazine, when the room seemed to brighten with the sound of a familiar voice. "Marcus," Jimmy said warmly as he stepped through the door. Marcus stood, a mix of surprise and happiness lighting up his face. "Mr. Carter! I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Jimmy smiled, his hand resting on Marcus's shoulder. "I told you I wouldn't forget about you," he said. "And I brought some friends." Behind Jimmy, 3 representatives from a veteran-focused nonprofit entered the room. Dressed professionally but with welcoming smiles, they introduced themselves to Marcus. "We're here to help you find a path forward," one of them said. "Job training, counseling, whatever you need." The small group gathered around a table, and Jimmy encouraged Marcus to share more about his life and aspirations. "Tell them what you told me," Jimmy prompted. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I've always had a love for the flag," he began. "It's a symbol of everything I've fought for, everything I believe in. I've been thinking, maybe I could start a flag restoration business. You know, cleaning, repairing, preserving flags for people who want to honor their history." The room grew quiet as Marcus spoke, his voice carrying a sense of hope and determination. "It's a small idea," he added, his tone modest, "but it's something I think I could do. Something meaningful." Jimmy leaned forward, his eyes shining with encouragement. "That's not a small idea, Marcus," he said firmly. "That's a vision." One of the nonprofit representatives nodded. "It's a great idea," she said, "and we can help you with the skills and resources to make it happen." Jimmy's voice broke through the quiet hum of agreement. "Let's not stop at resources," he said. "Marcus, I'd like to pledge the initial funding for your business. My foundation will cover the costs of getting you started, equipment, materials, even the first few months of rent for a workspace." Marcus froze, his mouth opening slightly in disbelief. You're serious?" he stammered. Jimmy chuckled. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it," he said, his tone kind but resolute. "You have the passion and the drive. Let's give you the tools to turn that into something real." The room buzzed with emotion. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reached out to shake Jimmy's hand. "I don't even know what to say," he murmured, his voice choked with gratitude. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough." Jimmy gripped his hand firmly, his gaze steady. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just make the most of this opportunity. And when you're able, help someone else who needs it. That's how we keep this world moving forward." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes, but he blinked them back, his expression shifting to one of determination. "I won't let you down," he promised. "I'll make this work." Jimmy smiled, a quiet pride evident in his expression. "I know you will, Marcus," he said. "This is just the beginning." As the meeting wrapped up, the representatives outlined the steps for Marcus to start his business. Jimmy listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with words of encouragement or practical suggestions. When it was time to leave, Jimmy stood and gave Marcus a final pat on the shoulder. "You're going to do great things," Jimmy said, his voice warm with conviction. "And I'll be here to cheer you on every step of the way." As Marcus watched Jimmy walk away, a sense of purpose filled his chest. For the first time in years, he believed in the future and in himself. News of Jimmy Carter's actions spread through Plains, Georgia, like wildfire. In a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone, the story of the former president helping a homeless veteran struck a deep chord. Local news outlets picked it up first, but soon, regional and even national media caught wind of the act of kindness. The town responded with an outpouring of generosity. Local businesses reached out to Marcus, offering supplies and services for his new flag restoration venture. The owner of a hardware store donated tools and materials, while a carpenter volunteered to help set up Marcus's workspace. A retired seamstress, touched by the story, offered to teach Marcus advanced sewing techniques for flag repairs. In the town square, Marcus became a figure of inspiration. "If Jimmy Carter believes in Marcus, so do we," said one resident. Others echoed the sentiment, organizing community events to raise additional funds for Marcus's business. Church groups and civic organizations contributed what they could, ensuring Marcus had a solid foundation to build on. Marcus was overwhelmed by the support, but remained focused on his journey. With Jimmy's encouragement, he began attending counseling sessions regularly, working through the PTSD that had haunted him for years. The sessions were tough, but they gave Marcus tools to face his challenges head-on. For the first time in a long while, he started to see a path forward. Alongside counseling, Marcus enrolled in a vocational training program facilitated by the veteran nonprofit Jimmy had connected him with. He learned business fundamentals, from managing finances to marketing strategies, and honed his flag restoration skills. Each completed lesson bolstered his confidence, and each step forward reminded him of the purpose he had rediscovered. Jimmy stayed involved throughout the process. Though he didn't want to overshadow Marcus's efforts, he made sure to check in regularly, offering guidance and encouragement. "Remember," Jimmy said during one of their calls, "this is your dream, Marcus. Own it, and don't be afraid to make it your own." As Marcus prepared to launch his business, the town buzzed with anticipation. People admired his resilience and determination, seeing him as a symbol of what was possible when someone was given a chance. Marcus, in turn, embraced his role as a leader in the community, promising to pay forward the kindness he had received. By the time Marcus's business officially opened, it was more than a personal achievement. It was a testament to the power of compassion and a community coming together. With every repaired and restored flag, Marcus carried forward a message of hope and resilience, honoring the past while building a brighter future. The sun shone brightly over Plains, Georgia, casting a warm glow on the small but bustling town square. A crowd gathered outside a modest shop with a sign that read, "Marcus's Flag Restoration and Memorabilia." It was the grand opening day, and the air buzzed with excitement. Local officials, townsfolk, and even visitors from neighboring cities had come to witness the ribbon-cutting ceremony. At the front of the crowd stood Jimmy Carter, his iconic smile radiating pride as he held a pair of scissors adorned with a red ribbon. Inside the shop, neatly displayed flags hung on the walls, each one meticulously restored to its former glory. Shelves lined with military memorabilia and photographs told stories of honor and sacrifice. The craftsmanship was impeccable, every stitch a testament to Marcus's dedication and care. As Marcus stepped forward to address the crowd, he held a small restored flag in his hands. His voice trembled slightly, but his words carried conviction. "This flag isn't just fabric. It's a symbol of resilience, unity, and hope," he said. The crowd erupted into applause as Marcus cut the ribbon, officially opening his shop to the public. Jimmy stood off to the side, quietly reflecting on the moment. It had all started with a tattered flag and a chance meeting. Watching Marcus now, a thriving business owner surrounded by a supportive community, Jimmy felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. It was proof of how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. "Today isn't just about Marcus," Jimmy said, addressing the gathering after the ceremony. "It's about what we can all achieve when we look out for one another. Small gestures can lead to big changes. We all have the power to make a difference." Marcus, now confident and poised, spent the afternoon greeting customers and sharing his story. Many thanked him for his service and expressed admiration for his journey. But Marcus wasn't content to stop there. He had already started mentoring other veterans, helping them navigate the challenges of reintegration and find their own paths forward. As the day wound down, Marcus stood in front of his shop, holding the newly restored flag that had once been in his hands on the sidewalk. It was a symbol of his journey, a journey made possible by compassion, resilience, and a community's unwavering support. With a determined smile, Marcus looked to the future, ready to pay forward the kindness that had transformed his life.